How does a small nation avoid being swallowed by a colossal neighbor? This age-old question continues to haunt global politics and shapes the strategies of many countries today. Take Ukraine in 1994, just after the Soviet Union's dissolution. With the world's third-largest nuclear arsenal suddenly under its control, Ukraine faced a critical decision. The Budapest Memorandum seemed like a safety net, offering security assurances from Russia, the US, and other Western powers in exchange for Ukraine surrendering its nuclear weapons. However, this deal, lacking the teeth of a formal military alliance, failed to protect Ukraine from further aggression, showcasing the potential pitfalls of relinquishing such a powerful deterrent. Now, as China's military clout grows under Xi Jinping's assertive leadership, smaller nations in the Indo-Pacific are on edge, drawing parallels to Ukraine's past predicaments. In this video, we delve into the strategic shifts of Vietnam and Indonesia, two nations ensnared in the contentious South China Sea disputes. Both countries staunchly oppose China's expansive 9-dash line claim, with Vietnam facing the most immediate threats. Join us as we explore how these nations are adapting their foreign policies to avoid Ukraine's fate, striving for security in a region shadowed by a looming superpower. Vietnam shares a land border with China that is 806 miles long. In early 1979, this border became the stage for a conflict between the two countries. 220,000 troops from China's People's Liberation Army attacked all 6 of Vietnam's border provinces that February. They occupied 23 cities and towns, up to a penetration of about 25 miles into Vietnamese territory. 3 weeks after the invasion, China declared that its mission had been accomplished and went home. Truthfully, the PLA had not performed as well as Beijing had hoped for, although the casualty figures coming from both sides are untrustworthy. Minor border clashes on land continued until 1991, when Vietnam and China normalized their diplomatic relations in the wake of the end of the Cold War. This normalization marked the end of the land boundary dispute between China and Vietnam. However, the two continue to dispute maritime boundaries and have ever since China seized control of the Paracel Islands in 1974. The naval battle there saw the deaths of over 100 then South Vietnamese personnel. 48 more plus 1 American liaison officer were captured, 18 Chinese were killed, and 67 more wounded. Vietnam still claims the islands, but China has controlled them to this day. The two also claim control over the Spratly Islands and have fought a battle there too. In 1988, Vietnam and China clashed with each other at sea again, this time near Johnson's South Reef in the Spratlys. China again prevailed, with 64 Vietnamese sailors being killed in action. China has controlled the reef ever since and began militarizing it with air defense systems in 2016. There's also no telling whether or not China will reopen the land dispute with Vietnam again. China has been keen to raise outlandish territorial issues with all of its neighbors, even its supposed unlimited strategic partner, Russia. This is a calculated foreign policy move on the part of Beijing. The gray zone operations that result from these claims gradually wear down the resolve and resources of China's neighbors, allowing it to steadily gain ground in the region. This was precisely how China gained control of the Scarborough Shoal from the Philippines in 2012. It was also how China steadily pushed its claims on the disputed border with India, which saw a series of deadly confrontations between 2020 and 2022. As a result of having an aggressive great power for a neighbor that it has frosty relations with at the best of times, Vietnam is a highly militarized state. It's ranked 3rd in the list of countries with the most total military personnel at 5.52 million, despite being 16th in world population with a little over 100 million. This puts Vietnam at having a military population of almost 57 per 1,000 people. However, of these personnel, only about 600,000 are on active duty. There are 5 million reservists and 250,000 paramilitary troops. China has the largest active standing army in the world, with almost 2.03 million active personnel. There are almost 510,000 reservists and 625,000 paramilitary troops in the Chinese military. China also has a decisive advantage in air power, tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, logistics, and of course, naval power. Vietnam's military may punch above its weight as it did in 1979, but it has no chance in an all-out confrontation. Vietnam is therefore gradually seeking new relationships in a burgeoning coalition to check the expansion of Chinese power in the Indo-Pacific region. This marks a departure from the country's traditional foreign policy, which is marked by 3 no's: no military alliances, no foreign military bases on Vietnamese territory, and no reliance on any country to combat others. Vietnam's only formal ally is its western neighbor Laos, with which it has ideological ties rooted in Marxism as much as it has shared security interests. Political obstacles have also prevented Vietnam from joining international alignments. Despite sharing a common security interest against China's expansionism, Vietnam's territorial disputes in the South China Sea involve the Philippines, Taiwan, and Malaysia. These disputes have prevented those countries from fully coalescing into a true coalition against Beijing's ambitions. Additionally, there are ideological issues. The US-led alliance network tends to have an ideological component, with the opposition to communism and support of multi-party democratic values as two vital components. Vietnam is still a one-party socialist state. The country's official constitutional name is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. As much as the economic commitment to Marxist ideas in economics has waned over the decades, the insistence on liberal values by the United States and its allies still creates a point of contention between Vietnam and its potential partners in a coalition against China. Despite these obstacles, the past few years have been marked by a flurry of diplomatic activity from Hanoi. For example, Vietnam has cooperated in the Quad Plus framework. This framework is an expansion of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the informal grouping of the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. Vietnam began to participate in some of these discussions as early as 2020, along with South Korea and New Zealand. The talks began with how these countries were handling the COVID-19 pandemic, as the Quad began to shift from a purely security-based conference to one which focused on broader issues. Vietnam has had a recurring presence in Quad Plus meetings since 2020. Vietnam has also gradually gotten itself involved in the economic and diplomatic network led by its former enemy, the United States. Since 2013, annual bilateral trade between the United States and Vietnam increased from $30 billion to $139 billion. Not coincidentally, President Biden paid a state visit to Vietnam in the autumn of 2023. There, he, alongside Nguyen Phu Trong, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, declared that the two nations were elevating their bilateral relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The partnership is ostensibly based on economic opportunities, giving Vietnam the ability to grow its economy through further American investment. Security issues were not emphasized in the official announcement of the new bilateral relationship. For the United States, though, the investments in Vietnam serve a security as well as an economic purpose, as they offer more options for American firms to move critical supply chains out of China. Beijing's behavior during the pandemic, when it threatened the global medical supply chain, forced Washington to double down on its efforts to relocate these manufacturing processes. It's also far from out of the question that the strategic partnership will eventually encompass a security dimension, as relations between the two countries improve in the face of new realities in the region. Vietnam has also struck up a growing partnership with America's Quad partner India. For India in particular, Vietnam is vital. It sits on the root of New Delhi's so-called Necklace of Diamonds strategy, the series of investments and bilateral relationships it hopes to forge to counter China's rival String of Pearls, which threatens to encircle India. India hopes that the Necklace of Diamonds will be a counter-encirclement of China, and Vietnam sits directly along that route. As such, India and Vietnam maintain good bilateral relations and have begun to strengthen their security ties independent of the Quad Plus framework. In 2020, India sold one patrol boat to Vietnam. Vietnam has also expressed interest in India's BrahMos ramjet supersonic cruise missile. However, after China raised concerns, the sale was not finalized. Vietnam has not yet signed on to any of India's strategic or infrastructure investments, but the country's gradual shift of its foreign policy is still in its relative infancy. As China continues its attempts to expand its influence in the region, India will likely serve as an ideal and necessary ally for the Vietnamese. The two nations share many mutual interests. Indonesia occupies a different seat at the region's table. It has a much friendlier relationship with China than Vietnam does. The two countries signed the Indonesia-China Strategic Partnership in 2005. Indonesia is also one of the biggest participants in China's Belt and Road Initiative, with almost $17 billion in Chinese capital invested there between 2014 and 2018 as part of the project. By December 2023, total Chinese investment in Indonesia amounted to nearly $44 billion. Bilateral trade in 2022 amounted to $73.4 billion, compared to the $27.19 billion in trade between Indonesia and the United States that year. Xi Jinping also has a close personal relationship with Indonesia's President Joko Widodo, who has been in office since 2014. Indonesia's geography affords it greater security from China's moves compared to Vietnam. It's located thousands of miles away from the Chinese mainland overseas. Consequently, it can have friendlier relations with Beijing. Nevertheless, even though the relationship between the two countries is good, there are underlying tensions which have come as a result of China's expansionist attitude in the region. Indonesia has not been involved in the most bitter battles of the South China Sea dispute like Vietnam has, but it still disputes China's 9-dash line. In particular, Indonesia has a contentious relationship with both China and Vietnam over the Natuna Islands which it governs. Although the islands slightly coincide with the 9-dash line, China renounced its claim over them in 1995, but not in a complete way. It still claims ownership of the rich oil and gas field northeast of the islands that was discovered 2 years earlier. Chinese and Vietnamese fishing boats have often come into these waters as well. On March 19, 2016, the Chinese Coast Guard rammed an Indonesian ship that had attempted to detain Chinese nationals for illegally fishing there. Indonesia's foreign ministry leveled a complaint with its Chinese counterpart 2 days later. Indonesia stepped up its destruction of illegal foreign fishing boats in response to this incident, and that June, President Widodo visited the Natuna Islands on a warship to demonstrate that his country would defend its sovereignty. The increase in tensions in the area eventually prompted the Indonesians to move one of their naval headquarters to the Natuna Islands to protect their country's territorial integrity. The move was in 2020, but that still didn't stop the Chinese Coast Guard from trying to interfere with Indonesian oil exploration in the area in December 2021. Perhaps unsurprisingly, public opinion of China in Indonesia began to decline through the 2010s, as Beijing threw its weight around under Xi Jinping. In a 2014 poll conducted by the BBC, 52% of Indonesians viewed Chinese influence in the area positively, compared to 28% that viewed it negatively. 7 years later, attitudes had changed significantly. Australia's Lowy Institute found that only 43% of Indonesians now thought that China's growth was good for their country. 60% said that Indonesia should join other countries to limit China's influence in the region. 48% thought that China's aim was to become the dominant power in Asia. Indonesia has in fact made some subtle moves to counter Chinese influence in the region, and China must be concerned about these moves because of Indonesia's strategic geography. The country occupies some of the most important real estate in the Indo-Pacific. Its most important geostrategic limitation of China is that its island of Sumatra occupies the southern part of the Strait of Malacca. This critical choke point has long been an object of worry for policymakers in Beijing. As early as 2003, then Chinese leader Hu Jintao warned of the threat that would come to China because of the actions of certain powers that aimed to control the Strait of Malacca. In 2016, almost 80% of China's oil imports came through this choke point. The volume of trade has only increased since then. China has attempted to develop alternative and less vulnerable routes through its investments in Pakistan and its relationship with Russia, but these have not yet replaced China's reliance on the strait. Cutting off shipping through the Strait of Malacca for only a week would increase the cost of global maritime trade by about $65 million. Every month would cost about $280 million, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Taking advantage of this geography, Indonesia has expanded its relationship with India, whose Andaman and Nicobar Islands lie only 90 nautical miles to the north of Sumatra. The Indian armed forces have a significant presence on these islands, with 7 air and naval bases, the country's only joint tri-service command, and further improvements coming. Missile batteries, more warships, drones, and soldiers are on their way. In 2023, the United States also gained some access to these islands, as the US Navy signed a 5-year Master Shipyard Repair Agreement (MSRA) with Larsen & Toubro Shipyard in Chennai. India can easily participate as a partner in this area should it choose to do so. India and Indonesia have cooperated in other ways too. Like the bilateral relationship with China, Jakarta and New Delhi have long had amicable relations, and the two countries work together at the level of a strategic partnership. Indonesia also has been keen to cooperate with India's grander ambitions. Unlike Vietnam, India has been a much more concrete partner in India's Necklace of Diamonds strategy. It granted India military access to its Sabang port, which occupies the northern entrance of the Strait of Malacca, in 2018. The military access includes Indian investments in improvements to the port. Indonesia and the United States have also steadily advanced their bilateral relations. In November 2023, a month after the announcement of the strategic partnership with Vietnam, President Biden hosted Widodo at the White House. There, the two leaders announced the new US-Indonesia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. The partnership covered various economic initiatives. These included diversifying the semiconductor supply chain, American investments in Indonesian businesses, and improving the country's rural connectivity were also major items in the agreement. Indonesia is also a source of nickel, a vital component in the battery technology found in electric vehicles. American enterprises are keen to gain access to this resource. However, security items were also major components of the new partnership, a big difference from the one with Vietnam. The United States and Indonesia have had significant security ties for many years. Indonesia has long been a purchaser of the F-16. In 2022, it expanded this relationship by purchasing the F-15EX to replace its Russian Su-27 and Su-30 fighters. Expanding on these ties, the two countries signed a new defense cooperation arrangement as part of the new strategic partnership. Cybersecurity and counterterrorism were part of the agreement, as was American assistance to improve Indonesia's maritime domain awareness and sea enforcement. This provision will help to improve India's ability to confront the pirates that prowl its crowded waters, and more dramatically, will help it to keep an eye on Chinese maritime activities. Most importantly, this agreement includes provisions for joint exercises between the US and Indonesian militaries. The agreement was not an alliance, but did build on the burgeoning security relationship between the two countries. American and Indonesian forces conducting joint exercises and using some of the same equipment puts the two in position to undertake more significant operations if the need arises, like closing the Strait of Malacca to Chinese shipping. India's cooperation in this matter would be almost certain. Indonesia has not been a party to the Quad Plus talks and has not yet shown a willingness to become more deeply involved in multilateral efforts. However, Indonesia's status as the world's third largest democracy, with free elections in a multi-party system, means there is less ideological friction between Washington and Jakarta than in the US-Vietnam relationship. Should Indonesia choose to participate in the US-led network, it will have a smoother time doing so. Jakarta's overall foreign policy is in some degree a measure of balancing the United States and China against one another to ensure that it can maintain its independence. Indonesia's current president-elect, Prabowo Subianto, is a good personal example of this policy. As the Minister of Defense, he was the one responsible for procuring the purchases of the F-15EX. Yet he has also called China a friendly nation, criticized the West while stating Indonesia should learn from Asian nations including China, and entertained the notion of joining the BRICS bloc. Nevertheless, by strengthening its economic and military cooperation with the United States, which Subianto has not pledged to abandon, Indonesia has also set itself on a course to maximize its geopolitical advantage and exercise a greater amount of leverage over China. Becoming too aggressive against Indonesia carries far more costs for China than aggression against Vietnam. With these factors on its side, Indonesia is a lot less likely to become like Ukraine. When a great power begins to assert itself and disrupt the traditional balance in a region, lesser powers will need to reassess their go-to foreign policies. China's rise has served this purpose for both Vietnam and Indonesia, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine sets a stark reminder of what can happen to nations that have such an assertive great power for a neighbor. Indonesia seems to be adjusting more quickly than Vietnam. The latter is still reluctant to cast aside its traditional non-alignment. Nevertheless, Vietnam's gradual shift toward the growing coalition against Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific region is inevitable. Security considerations will always be the most decisive factor in the foreign policy of a state. Since Vietnam's security situation is far more precarious than Indonesia's, Hanoi might well take a page out of Jakarta's playbook and upgrade its strategic partnership with the United States. Vietnam might not enjoy America's promotion of multi-party democracy, but it ultimately has little choice when an aggressive China sits right across the border. What further moves do you think Vietnam and Indonesia will make to ensure they do not become the subject of Chinese aggression in the region? Will Vietnam continue to shift its foreign policy toward alignment with its old enemy as conditions in Asia change? What will Subianto's taking power in October mean for the relationship between Indonesia and the United States? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out Taiwan has a secret revenge plan for China, or click this other video instead.